welcome everybody. It's a new week here at the Marijuana Times. It's Cannabis News. I'm your host, Joe Klare. It's October 21st, 2019. Check us out at marijuanatimes.org. Click the video tab there to find this show. A lot of great articles there as well. marijuanatimes.org today, talking about the problem with marijuana legalization. We'll also give you an update on the breathalyzer test for cannabis that's supposed to be coming. And northeastern governors got together for a powwow on legalization, to talk about legalization regulations and such. All of that is coming up. But first, of course, Cannabis News is brought to you by Natureside, nature-side.com, and their organic, all-natural pesticides. Grow safe and poison-free with Natureside. Don't use harmful chemicals. Don't use banned pesticides. Be regulatory compliant in the state that you are growing in. Don't use harmful pesticides no matter what you're growing. If it's going to be something someone's ingesting, whether it's cannabis or something else, use Natureside. Nature-side.com, a proud sponsor of Cannabis News. Thank you, Natureside. This first story by yours truly at marijuanatimes.org. The problem with marijuana legalization. That's right. There's a lot of good that comes from marijuana legalization. Obviously, it's the main focus of the activism of what we talk about here at Cannabis News and at the Marijuana Times. And obviously, over the last several years, there's been a lot of progress and a lot of good things that have happened in the United States. But the problem is, and many of you know what the problem is, besides the incompetence of the bureaucrats and lawmakers and such and officials that are implementing legalization in various states, there is the problem of the incremental nature in which we're going about legalization in the United States to begin with. I know, as I point out in the article, there's practical political realities to this because the federal government has not legalized. We've had to do this state by state, sometimes jurisdiction by jurisdiction within a state, and it's created a confusing patchwork of laws to where if someone drove from North Carolina, or New York rather, to California or North Carolina, from the East Coast to the West Coast or vice versa, through the United States with a joint in their pocket, they will face dozens upon dozens of different variations of laws depending on what jurisdiction and what state they are in. It's all due to the slow, incremental, bit by bit, battle by battle way we have to do this. And it's going to be that way until the federal government changes their tune. There's really no way to get around it. As I said in the article, if a couple years ago, say 2012, the federal government had legalized legalized marijuana, there'd be 40 states right now with adult use marijuana legalization. But because the federal government hasn't done that, we have to fight for every single inch, and it's created a lot of confusion, a lot of problems. I reference a Politico piece in my piece where they talk about the patchwork of cannabis laws across the country. And until federal law is changed, it's going to continue to be that way. When federal law does change, the states might become more uniform in what they're doing. There may be certain standards that they try to adhere to, try to mirror their laws with the federal government, or failing that with, other comparable states. And there may be some sort of cohesion eventually when it comes to cannabis laws from coast to coast, but I wouldn't expect that anytime soon. This next story from ProvidenceJournal.com. Game changer breath test for marijuana knows if you're stoned. Well, that's an awful big claim. New Jersey lawmakers debated earlier this year whether to legalize recreational use of marijuana, but the Garden State's police organizations were adamantly against it. The cops said legal weed might lead to an explosion in the numbers of impaired drivers operating under the influence, and the police would be caught flat-footed trying to tell whether or not the drivers they pulled over were high. We've talked about this issue many, many times. Marijuana stays in your system for a long time. There's really no way to gauge impairment just judging by a blood test with a certain THC amount in the blood. The breathalyzer device developed by Hound Labs in Northern California. We've talked about it before. It's portable and can run tests for both alcohol and marijuana. It may change the minds of many of those reluctant police officers, including in Pennsylvania, as lawmakers consider several proposals to legalize recreational marijuana use. Mike Lynn, a veteran emergency department physician from Oakland, California, developed the Hound in collaboration with researchers from the University of California at Berkeley and San Francisco. Lynn claims this device can detect whether someone has smoked pot or ingested a marijuana edible in the last 3 hours. Canadian startup called Santec has a device in development with similar capabilities. The Hound is a base station and a handheld device that together will retail for about $5,000. You can imagine, if it works and works well, they'll be selling it to many, many police stations across the country. There's a lot of money. They've raised a lot of money. They led a $30 million Series D financing round to try to bring it to market in 2020. That was from Intrinsic Capital Partners. They're convinced of the potential massive market for the device, which they should be, as I said, if it works. We may never have a standard when it comes to like blood tests, but if states start passing laws and start amending laws to say, for instance, if a breathalyzer, this breathalyzer, model whatever, shows that you've ingested cannabis in the last 3 hours, you'll get a DUI. There'll be more of a time thing when it comes to impairment, because knowing the nanograms of THC in someone's bloodstream is never going to tell you their level of impairment. But if you want to have a law that says, well, you can't use within 3 hours of driving, and then the breathalyzer shows that you did, then they'll have more of a kind of a uniform standard that would, I guess, hold up in a court of law, more so than saying, hey, this impairment expert said that this person's impaired. That's a very subjective thing, and how well it'll hold up would remain to be seen. But there's a detector that can tell someone, or tell law enforcement rather, how long ago you used cannabis or used it within a certain time window. That may become the standard down the line when it comes to gauging impairment and charging people with DUIs when it comes to marijuana. This last story from Inquirer.com. Key northeastern governors join forces to chart a path for legalizing marijuana. Excuse me. The governors of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York met for a summit to discuss coordinating marijuana policies. It is complicated, it is controversial, and it is consequential, said New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who hosted the regional cannabis regulation and vaping summit. If you don't do it right, you can do harm. The whole process here is to do good. The governors of all 4 states, which are all Democrats, by the way, support legalizing cannabis for adult recreational use. Of course, we've talked about Pennsylvania's Tom Wolf recently expressed support for the first time, saying most of the Keystone States residents back it, and that the state has a wealth of knowledge from experience of other states to guide it. New Jersey's Phil Murphy ran on a platform to legalize it. Obviously, these 4 states we talked a lot about on the show, and there are various levels of progress moving towards marijuana legalization. Pennsylvania, as they mentioned, is just getting started. New Jersey has some problems, as did New York last year, in the legislature getting started with and getting things through with the legislature as far as cannabis goes. Stalled as a result. Connecticut, things stalled and were pushed back next year as well. Whether or not this summit will help facilitate that, I don't know. I guess they're basically trying to get, because the states are so close together, they're trying to get some kind of uniform, like what I was talking about before, that there's kind of a uniform standard or uniform expectation when it comes to the laws from state to state. It'll be something that cannabis users will find very helpful, because a lack of it is very unhelpful. So we're trying to clear that up. And again, without federal law changing, a lot of this is just bit by bit, piece by piece, and not very efficient, quick, non-confusing way to do it at all. We continue to cover those stories and more here at Cannabis News 5 days a week at MarijuanaTimes.org. Search the Marijuana Times on YouTube. Click the notification bell so you know when a new episode has dropped. If you want the audio version, Apple Podcasts for that. MarijuanaTimes.org, a bunch of great articles. Natureside, thank you to them, nature-side.com, and their organic all-natural pesticides. Thank you to all of you who watch and listen and share these videos and shows. Please continue to do so, and we'll see you next time right here on Cannabis News.